I, Vampire number 9, written by Joshua Hale Fialkov, art by Andrea Sorrentino. This picks up after the big crossover event where Andrew takes control of all of the vampires, promising, okay, we're not going to kill people no more, but you're going to follow me. And he sends John and Tig off to get the Van Helsings for some super secret plan. So this issue picks up after some time where Andrew's sitting at the edge of the bed with Mary in bed, and he's brooding. He feels like he's making a mistake, and Mary's like, yeah, you brought us to Utah. And he's like, yeah, very funny. But as he steps outside, we see they're out in the middle of the desert, and there's just this, as far as the eye can see, tent camp just set up where all these vampires are staying. And he's like, well, at least nobody's killed anybody yet. But as he walks down, the vampires stop him, and he's like, oh, hello, my lord. It's another beautiful day. Perhaps maybe we can feed? And Bennett's just like, no, we don't feed anymore. And everyone's like, oh, come on, man, we're hungry. You promised us a better life. And he's like, hey, I'm here to make sure we all survive. We will be hunted if we don't do this right. Like, we have to, I will continue to assure our existence. And one vampire speaks up, and he's like, yeah, no, great. I love living, just waiting to, like, starving to death and then waiting to be staked. And Andrew sees him just like talking shit about him, and just uses his new powers to raise this vampire up, holds him up in the air with his powers, and he's like, hey, I'm not your savior. I'm your jailer. And only through me are you going to be saved. And Mary comes up and is just like, yeah, no, you're great, honey. Now can you please set him down? So he lets the guy down. And we cut back over to John and Tig, who are currently in, I'm going to mispronounce the crap out of this, Baden-Württemberg, Germany, where they approach like this crazy-ass Castlevania castle. And it's like, look, John's explaining, this is the place the Van Helsings, like, these people existed well before the Dracula was written. In fact, what was the guy who wrote that book? It's in here somewhere. He lived next to this castle. Bram Stoker, that's it. He lived next to this castle as a boy, or at least that's what it said. So he picked it up from here. But anyway, they knocked out the gate, and they're just these giant doors. And Tig's like, you know they're watching us, right? And he's like, yeah, I know. They've been watching us for days. And he's like, so you know this is a trap, right? And he's like, well, yeah, I'm not an imbecile. So they get inside, and as soon as they're inside, they're just surrounded by all these people with guns who are like, all right, state your purpose. And he's like, I bring a message from America. And he's like, we have people for that. Why are you here? And he's like, I bring a message from Andrew Bennett. And that's apparently enough to get them through. Meanwhile, back in America, Andrew makes his way to a nearby slaughterhouse, and he's paying off some people to basically collect the heads of cattle to use to feed his camp. And he's getting 500 heads, like, at least a week. So he's setting up a way to live. But as he's leaving, he's accosted by two locals, and it's like, hey, you some of those perverts out in the deserts? And he's like, yeah, no, we're not really perverts. And he's like, yeah, well, some people saying you're vampires. And he's like, well, I'm here out in the sun, so clearly I'm not a vampire. And he's like, I guess, but you and your kind aren't welcome around here. And he's like, oh? He's like, yeah, you better pack up and leave. Oh, really? What would you say would happen if I didn't? And he's like, oh, well, this would happen. He punches Andrew in the face, and he's like, oh, okay, well, see, if you did that. And then he grabs the guy's heads and seemingly explodes them and walks away. And as he walks away, it's clear that it was just like a vision he put in their head. And as they sit up, they're like, what the hell was that? So then we cut back to the Van Helsings, and John's just explaining to them, like, look, Andrew's not acting like himself. He's doing this for some reason, and he wanted me to come and get you for some reason, and he wants you guys to go and find him, and I'm sure whatever plan he has will work itself out, but he wants you to go find him. And as he's explaining this plan to the Van Helsings, they really don't trust these two because they're working with Bennett. So as the conversation's going on, they're presented drinks. They just absentmindedly drink it. It's poisoned, and they're taken out. So then we go back to Andrew. He arrives back at his base, and Mary's trying to convince him, like, hey, honey, how about you just let them feed for a while? That would, like, really just lower all the tensions. Just one tiny little town. And Andrew steps forward and he's like, all right, hey, everybody. I get the tensions are high. If you want to feed, go ahead. Just go for it. But you got to fight me for it. So step up. And nobody's willing to step up. Everyone's like looking away and just like, oh, la da 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 dee. And he's like, no one? Come on. I swear to you, I won't toy with you. I will present you a fast death. And so at that point, one vampire does step up. It's Mary. And Mary's like, I'll take you up on that fight. You and me one-on-one. If you win, I die. They're all yours. If I win, I get my vampires back. And so that's set up. And then finally we get a helicopter being flown by the Van Helsing group. And John and Tig wake up and they're like, oh, geez, what happened? It's like, yeah, sorry. We just had to make sure you guys were telling the truth. So don't, relax. We don't have very long to go. And John asks where they're going and is saying like, oh, we're going to visit your friend, of course. And he's like, ah, man, I hate Utah. As we see that this is just an entire fleet of helicopters being flown out there. So we have an army of vampire hunters going up against an army of vampires, and they're going to battle it out in the deserts of Utah. I'm in. This sounds great. I don't have to tell you, I've been loving this book the whole time. You know it. So it's keeping that up. It's a new direction where he is literally king of the vampires, and he's just trying to keep, like, he has a plan, but he's just trying to keep things going long enough for that plan to take effect. And it's great throughout. Art, not a bad page in the book. And my only critique leading up to, like, the crossover was that the covers, I think they were Jenny Frisian, they were fine, but they just didn't fit the tone of this book. This cover right now, great. I'm loving this cover. So if they keep up that style, it fits the tone perfectly. So overall, I'm giving this I don't really have a bad thing to say about it. It doesn't feel super special. Like, it's nothing that's really like, wow, hey, look at this. So highest I really feel I can go is like an 8.5. But it's fantastic the whole way through. And I don't know. I think this is the last trade, and we're already like halfway through it, which makes me very sad. I think it only goes to issue 12. I'm very sad about that, but I will enjoy the ride until it ends.